Chapter 16 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 16. Sally tells of her sweethearts and discourses on the duties of life. Sally and Miss Benson took it in turns to sit up, or rather they took it in turns to nod by the fire; for, if Ruth was awake, she lay very still in the moonlight calm of her sick bed. That time resembled a beautiful August evening, such as I have seen. The white, snowy, rolling mist covers up under its great sheet all trees and meadows and tokens of earth, but it cannot rise high enough to shut out the heavens, which on such nights seem bending very near, and to be the only real and present objects. And so near, so real and present, did heaven and eternity and God seem to Ruth, as she lay encircling her mysterious holy child. One night Sally found out she was not asleep. "I'm a rare hand at talking folks to sleep," said she. "I'll try on thee, for thou must get strength by sleeping and eating. What must I talk to thee about, I wonder? Shall I tell thee a love story or a fairy story, such as I've telled Master Thurstan many a time and many a time, for all his father set his face again fairies, and called it vain talking? Or shall I tell you the dinner I once cooked, when Mr Harding, as was Miss Faith's sweetheart, came unlooked for, and we'd nought in the house but a neck of mutton, out of which I made 7 dishes, all with a different name?" "Who was Mr Harding?" asked Ruth. "Oh, he was a grand gentleman from Lunnon, as had seen Miss Faith, and had been struck by her pretty looks when she was out on a visit, and came here to ask her to marry him. She said no, she would never leave Master Thurstan, as could never marry. But she pined a deal after he went away. She kept up afore Master Thurstan, but I seed her fretting, though I never let on that I did, for I thought she'd soonest get over it and be thankful, and after she'd be the strength to do right. However, I've no business to be talking of Miss Benson's concern. I'll tell you of my own sweethearts and welcome, or I'll tell you of the dinner, which was the grandest thing I ever did in my life. But I thought a Londoner should never think country folks knew nothing. And my word, I puzzled him with his dinner. I'm doubting whether to this day he knows whether what he was eating was fish, flesh, or fowl. Shall I tell you how I managed?" But Ruth said she would rather hear about Sally's sweethearts, much to the disappointment of the latter, who considered the dinner by far the greatest achievement. "Well, you see, I don't know as I should call them sweethearts, for excepting John Rawson, who was shut up in a madhouse the next week, I never had what you may call a downright offer of marriage but once. But I had once, and so I may say I had a sweetheart. I was beginning to be afeard, though, for one likes to be axed. That's but civility. And I remember, after I had turned 40, and afore Jeremiah Dixon had spoken, I began to think John Rawson had perhaps not been so very mad, and that I'd done ill to lightly his offer as a madam's, if it was to be the only one I was ever to have. And I don't mean as I'd have had him, but I thought, if it was to come o'er again, I'd speak respectful of him to folk, and say it were only his way to go about on all fours, but that he was a sensible man in most things. However, I'd had my laugh, and so had others, at my crazy lover, and it was late now to set him up as a Solomon. However, I thought it would be no bad thing to be tried again, but I little thought the trial would come when it did. You see, Saturday night is a leisure night in counting houses and such like places, while it's the busiest of all for servants. Well, it was a Saturday night, and I'd my baize apron on, and the tails of my bedgown pinned together behind, down on my knees, pipe-claying the kitchen, when a knock comes to the back door. 'Come in,' says I, but it knocked again, as if it were too stately to open the door for itself. So I got up rather cross and opened the door, and there stood Jerry Dixon, Mr. Holt's head clerk, only he was not head clerk then. So I stood, stopping up the door, fancying he wanted to speak to master, but he kind of pushed past me, and telling me somewhat about the weather, as if I could not see it for myself, he took a chair and sat down by the oven. Cool and easy, thought I, meaning himself, not his place, which I knew must be pretty hot. Well, it seemed no use standing waiting for my gentleman to go. Not that he had much to say either, but he kept twirling his hat round and round, and smoothing the nap on it with the back of his hand. So at last I squatted down to my work, and thinks I shall be on my knees all ready if he puts up a prayer, for I knew he was a Methody by bringing up, and he had only lately turned to master's ways of thinking. And them Methodies are terrible hands at unexpected prayers when one least looks for 'em. I can't say I like their way of taking one by surprise, as it were, but then I'm parish clerk's daughter, and could never demean myself to dissenting fashions, always save and except Master Thurston's, bless him. However, I'd been caught once or twice unawares, so this time I thought I'd be up to it, and I moved a dry duster whenever I went to kneel upon in case he began when I were in a wet place. By and by I thought, if the man would pray it would be a blessing, for it would prevent his sending his eyes after me wherever I went, for when they takes to praying they shuts their eyes, and quivers the lids in a queer kind of way, them dissenters does. I can speak pretty plain to you, for you're bred in the church like myself, and must find it out o' the way as I do to be among dissenting folk. God forbid I should speak disrespectful of Master Thurston and Miss Faith, though. I never think on them as church or dissenters, but just as Christians. But to come back to Jerry. First I tried always to be cleaning at his back, but when he wheeled round, so as always to face me, I thought I'd try a different game. So I says, "Master Dixon, I ax your pardon, but I must pipe clay under your chair. Will you please to move?" Well, he moved, and by I was at him again with the same words, and at after that, again and again, till he were always moving about with his chair behind him, like a snail as carries its house on its back. And the great goppus never seed that I was pipe-claying the same places twice over. At last I got desperate cross. He were so in my way, so I made 2 big crosses on the tails of his brown coat, for you see, wherever he went, up or down, he drew out the tails of his coat from under him, and stuck them through the bars of the chair, and flesh and blood could not resist pipe-claying them for him, and a pretty brushing he'd have, I reckon, to get it off again. Well, at length he clears his throat uncommon loud, so I spreads my duster and shuts my eyes all ready, but when nought comed of it, I opened my eyes a little bit to see what he were about. My word, if there he wasn't down on his knees right facing me, staring as hard as he could. Well, I thought it would be hard work to stand that, if he made a long ado, so I shut my eyes again, and tried to think serious, as became what I fancied were coming. But forgive me. But I thought, why couldn't the fellow go in and pray with Master Thurston, as had always a calm spirit ready for prayer, instead of me, who had my dresser to scour, let alone an apron to iron. At last he says he, "Sally, will you oblige me with your hand?" So I thought it were, maybe, Methody fashion, to pray hand in hand, and I'll not deny but I wished I'd washed it better after blackleading the kitchen fire. I thought I'd better tell him it were not so clean as I could wish, so I says, "Master Dixon, you shall have it, and welcome, if I may just go and wash 'em first." "But," says he, "my dear Sally, dirty or clean, it's all the same to me, seeing I'm only speaking in a figuring way." What I'm asking on my bended knees.